the Project Egg Show. I'm your host, Ben Gothard, and today we have the honor of speaking with Ryan Mulvany. How you doing today, Ryan?
Doing great, man. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm so excited to chat with you today because you're a total rock star and you're awesome. So I want to talk about that more, and I really want to dive into it specifically from the angle of what is your story?
Hmm. I do. Well, I want to start off by saying I like your that wrestling intro voice that you did right there, because we were sort of rapping beforehand, and then all of a sudden, like, boom, it's on. I gotta develop my intro voice.
Well, you know, it.
I
I kind of go back and forth from like late night FM DJ to trying to be super professional. So thank you for the feedback. Definitely start focusing and honing in on this one.
Yeah. What is your story? It's such a broad question, right? Because I could start back October 23rd, 1984, when I was born. Now we're not going to start there. My story that most people know me for is I've built a business about servicing brands within Amazon. And we found a little bit of success, and then we ended up selling that business about 2 years ago to a strategic partner. And so I've had a pretty decent run at a fairly young age. I mean, not as young as you, obviously. It's actually my birthday tomorrow. So I guess tomorrow's relative to today, but oh no, we're live. So that makes sense. But if the podcast comes out in 2 weeks, people are gonna be like, oh, he's a November baby or something. But anyway.
So you're October 23rd.
23rd, yeah.
Dude, today's actually my birthday. I'm October 22nd.
Look at that. So you're then a Libra. And then I'm a Scorpio Libra, whatever that means. It varies depending on which horoscope you read.
Yeah, I don't know what that means, but happy early birthday, my friend.
I mean, this isn't a horoscope show. We're not going to talk about astrology. So anyway, I love entrepreneurship. I love, personal development. I've got 3 kids, a wife. We've been married for about 9 years. So there's all sorts of different directions this story could go, depending on where you want to take it.
Yeah. So let's really start from when you were younger. Like, who were you back then? What kind of person were you? What kind of kid were you?
Growing up, I had a lot of energy, which sort of correlated over to like ADD. Never diagnosed. I sort of felt like, I could rein it in when I needed to, but it was so much more fun to sort of live in the fantasy. And so I didn't always rein it in. And, it got me into trouble in the sense that like I had to try harder in school than I think some people did. I had 2 wonderful parents. My dad owns a veterinary clinic here in San Diego. My mom works for my dad. And so from a very young age, I saw somebody who would go to work, come home, and would still be working because it was his business. And so I think that was sort of ingrained in me, in through high school into college, where it was just sort of like life there, the work-life balance that everybody strives for, because he enjoyed what he did. It didn't need to have that distinction like that. Oh, here's work and here's life. It was sort of blended. And so, I sort of, when I was going through college and thinking about careers, I tried to look for something that would sort of invigorate me in that way where I didn't care that it was coming home with me.
So when you were seeing that day in and day out, and it wasn't like, oh, now I'm home from the office. Now I'm not touching it. I'm not even thinking about it until tomorrow. It's like, it's not my problem. Now, you're seeing that when every time he's coming home every day, he's bringing it back into the home. And it seems like that was a source of joy that probably did have a really big impact on you of like, wow, like this is how it's supposed to be, instead of somebody hating their job or somebody, just not caring about it at any level.
Yeah. What I found was, it wasn't always sunshine and roses. He would have to go in for emergency cases at like midnight, like all the time. Just because he knew how to perform the surgery, or there wasn't a doctor, on call for it. But what I found was he would come home and he would, you're pretty busy as a veterinarian if you're seeing clients and you're managing the business and all that stuff. And then he would come home and he'd work on pieces of the business that were going to accelerate it, sort of grow it. And so it was cool, this sort of like personal development piece to his business that he, it was probably like some of the most important stuff that he needed to do for the business, but he couldn't get to it during the day. And so he would, he would bring it home. And, while maintaining, 3 kids that he was raising, he had he would exercise. So he would still balance it all out. But it was, his hobbies were geared around, either being, taking care of his kids or being a piece of the business. And he didn't complain once about it. He still doesn't complain about it.
So that personal development piece, is that something that you picked up as far as either reading or working on yourself or doing like organizational life thinking, or like how did, if it did, how did that actually manifest itself in your life?
So my mom, different, my dad's a very stoic, positive person, but he's more introverted. My mom would be more extroverted, super positive all the time. Never knew that she ever worried about anything. And she's that type of person that if you speak to her, she wants to make you feel so involved and loved. And that just really sort of rubbed off on me. And what I found later in life was, that she actually did worry about quite a bit, but the wiring in my brain had already sort of settled. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to be this sort of happy-go-lucky, positive person. And what I started realizing was that most people weren't that way. Like they would talk to me, or they'd be like, wow, you have good energy. I'm like, what does that even mean? Like, you have good energy? Like, I'm just being myself. And so I was like, well, maybe there's something bigger here that, that there's some sort of tenets. So I remember when The Secret came out, and it was talking about like the power of like positive thinking and affirmation and all this stuff. And I was like, people aren't like this. Like, this isn't the normal sort of way to be. And I think that's where it's good and bad, right? I joke that like, I've got enough ADD to have a lot of ideas, and then I've got enough like stubbornness to try to actually see some of them through. And that doesn't always, most of the time that doesn't pencil out well for you. And so, I think you have to, reading those personal development books, it keeps you in a good place to continuously be checking yourself, making sure that you're working on the right things and doing the right things, so forth.
So as you were then entering into, I believe you said you went to college, or at least had some time there. What was that experience like for you? And was it at that point that you kind of decided on a career path, or how did that really evolve over time?
It's funny, I've never even told the story. So going down the path of like, oh, I can do anything I want in this life. I picked up playing guitar like 2 years into high school, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to be a musician now. And so my parents weren't super thrilled on that, but they're like, cool, you can go be a music major. And so I go to Long Beach State, which is just up the coast from here. They have a decent music program. And I get in, and I remember I ended up dorming with people in the music department. And I kid you not, I get in there, and my roommate was like, he was like this piano savant, like music savant. And he, it came out later that like I could like click on this cup and he would tell you what key it was in. He would tell you what key you spoke in. The depth he could see into music was just phenomenal. And I was like, okay, I know you don't have to know all that to be a musician, but I'm like, dude, I am so out of my league. I guess I'm not going to be a musician, because like, he was just so much better than me. And at that point I realized like I didn't have the grit in me to go towards music in that way. And I was like, all right, I guess I'm not going to be a musician. So I was like the serial major changer. I think I went from like that to like biology, because I was like, I like surfing, maybe I'll be an oceanographer. And then I went from that to mechanical engineering. And then I went from mechanical to civil, and then I ended up like going far enough into civil. It was civil construction management engineering that like I got into 4 years of that. And then I was like, I'm sort of an artist though. I'm not an engineer. And so I convinced my parents that another year of getting a film degree would be fruitful. And so I ended up getting a film degree on top of the engineering degree. And they were cool. They were supportive. They were like, okay, at least you have this like, real degree, and now you can have a film degree. It's not to say that film isn't a real degree, but like they like the other one a little bit more.
So you went from embracing the art, the inner artist, the inner guitar player, and then from there you had this incredible experience with this savant,
Mm-hmm.
which it seems like that gave you really a lot of perspective from an early age, and then that translated into all the other majors. But I'm curious, do you still see yourself as an artist, and where did that really come from?
Yeah, I think everybody's an artist in some capacity. I think some just suppress it more than others. You know, if I look at like even my dad as an example, like you wouldn't look at him like an artist, but he actually enjoys writing. He just doesn't do it. And so I think that my growing up, I had a grandma who was an artist, and she had a full art studio, and a lot of my cousins were artists, and so it was sort of like I was around it quite a bit. And I use the term artist not because you make paintings. It's sort of a different perspective of looking at the world and sort of looking at how maybe you can put your stamp on it, versus sort of fitting into the cogs that everybody else goes. There's not one way is better than the other. I think I just sort of gravitated towards like the more artsy side of the world. Although I didn't think that it was going to be enough to actually support me in a career and a life and kids and family and mortgages. And so I went towards like an engineering degree because that was sort of the safe path. Although I wouldn't be very good at it because I wasn't that into it. And it's just a degree, right? I never actually did anything with it.
So once you then had your 2 degrees, what happened after that?
Oh, I'm ready to go. And through college, I had like 15 internships, because if you're changing your degrees that much, you're like, well, let me just start toe dipping into waters. And so I had internships at, TV production companies, film studios, all sorts of different places. And I ended up getting a job out of college at a television station down here in San Diego, to be a news producer. So I would wake up at 3:30, be there by about 4. I would produce I'd write and script a newscast that went live at like 7 or 8. And then we'd have a break, and then we did another PM newscast based on anything that had changed. And so that was an interesting career, making $9 an hour and waking up and work crazy, weird hours. That lasted maybe for about a year. I really wanted to be in front of the camera during that whole time, but I didn't really want to be a news reporter. I didn't like the way they talked, and I didn't like the stuff they talked about. And I'm like, I don't want to do any of that. And on top of that, I had an internship before that at an actual news station. And one of the reporters was like, dude, do not stay in this career. You're going to make like 40 grand a year and just get out right now. I was like, huh. Because he was like the guy I wanted to be like. I was like, okay, well, maybe that's not the path. And so that lasted for a year. And then I ended up leaving there because it was a beautiful summer in San Diego. And I was like, I'm going to go I want to be outside. And I got a job doing kayak tours down in La Jolla where you visited.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And then from there, I was like, okay, I actually got to get a real job. So I ended up after getting an internship at a tech startup, which sort of like started me down the career path. And I was living at my parents' house at the time, so I didn't need to bring in money. And so I was able to sort of give them my experience, and then ultimately getting a job there. And sort of, I worked there for like 4 or 5 years. And then from there, actually got laid off. They were raising money, and, there was some constraints. And so I got laid off. I got a job a couple of days later at a digital agency. And from there, that's where we started the business about a year after that. That turned into Quiver, which we then sold a couple of years ago.
So when you were then moving from being the kayak explorer guide into the tech startup world, that's a pretty big jump. And I'm just curious, like, why did you go from one to the other? I understand why you left the kayak, but why was your path, the next stepping stone on that path, the tech startup? What was the reasoning behind that?
To be honest, I'd heard the word startups, but I didn't really know what it meant. But I knew that it was usually going to be younger people that were sort of running them, at least in my limited capacity of it, because that is totally not what it is. But I thought it was. And so I went in there and I interviewed, and they were just looking for it was entry level, and they were looking for someone to sort of like PM. And because I had had so many internships before that, they were like, okay, we can just throw stuff at you. And so I did have some experience. Like, I was pretty well versed in just stuff on the internet, and I could make little videos, and they wanted me to make videos about their product that they had. It was a website. And so that was sort of the foot in the door. So there was a component of video production in it, but it sort of left that role after about 6 months as more sort of pertinent needs for the business sort of sprung up.
So it was more like, oh, I have these skills and I think it would be cool to work with other young people and be part of something cool that I heard, which is a startup. Let's go figure it out. Was it kind of like an exploratory thing?
Yeah. And, I had been at a ton of companies just as an intern, before that. And when you went into this startup, like it was down by the beach, it was funded. It felt so different. It didn't feel like work. It felt like a party, and not the sense that we were just partying all the time, but it felt like, oh, I'm just working with my friends and we're trying to do this cool thing. It totally like changed my perspective on what the work environment felt like. And it's something that I still hold on to this day when we built our business. It's like, how do we create that family sort of cultivated life feeling while we grow, which is really difficult as you get bigger and bigger.
So then when you made the transition to the marketing agency, why did you decide to go to a marketing agency?
Well, I got laid off. And I always liked the idea of agencies, just because they understood a lot of the components of the internet, which to me is where where business was all going. So to learn that, I thought was going to be pretty fruitful. But to be honest, like my buddy got a job there. He called me and he said, "Hey, can you sell mattresses online?" And I guess we should back up, because when I was at the tech startup, I wasn't making a ton of money. And it's sort of where the beginning of the Amazon journey started for me. My fiance had graduated college. She handed me a textbook and said, "Sell this on Amazon." And I was like, "Okay, I'll do that." And so I put it up and it sold like, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes later. And I was like, that was way too easy. And so I looked around. I was at her parents' house. They had a ton of books everywhere. And I took all those books and I threw them up on Amazon. And they sold overnight. Like half of them had just sold. And I was like, I just need to get books and then put them on Amazon. They're going to sell. And so I started doing this. And the idea was like, all right, I'm going to do that to fund my honeymoon. And I called my little store One Love Books. And so off we went, and it funded the honeymoon. And then the irony is when I flew down on the honeymoon, I had all this anxiety because I had turned my store into vacation mode and I wasn't selling anything anymore. And so like I literally like in Belize on the middle of a beach, I like wired into it, like the internet, and turned my store back on. I'm like, I've had a store ever since. And so it was this thing I did to just subsidize my income, but it ended up like helping us buy a house and all this stuff. And when I landed at this agency, the reason I got there is my buddy who was working there. He's like, "Hey, can you sell I know you sell all sorts of random stuff on Amazon now. Can you sell mattresses?" And I was like, "Of course." No idea how to sell mattresses. And so I went in there and I interviewed, and they liked, and they're like, "Cool, you can sell mattresses. And then you can also just be a client manager at the agency as well."
So it was an idea that you had from helping your fiance sell the textbook, which led to selling more books, which led to your own store. And then you develop the skill of being able to sell stuff online. That's what your friend recognized and was like, "Hey, I need your help selling mattresses."
Yeah. It was, it's like most things in life. You start out in one direction and then you discover something along the way and then end up veering off significantly. And that's exactly what it was. He was like, "Hey, can you sell these mattresses?" So it was cool. I was like there and I was like salaried. And then I had this whole bonus plan based on selling mattresses. The kicker is the mattresses weren't very good. Like they were these air mattresses, but like really high end, like $400 or $500 air mattresses that ended up having like a ton of manufacturer defects. So really learned the value of like customer service and taking care of it. And what was cool is the owner of the agency was like a very stand-up guy. We ended up partnering to start the new entity. And so I got to get road tested with him through stressful times as well. And we're like, "How do we handle this?" He's like, "Well, some investments pay off, some don't." He was a pretty successful entrepreneur at that time. And I was like, so I got a lot of sort of entrepreneurial acumen from him.
And so what was the impetus there to start that business?
So when I was there, I started just asking the brands as they would come in, because it was a digital agency. So like SEO, pay-per-click, Facebook, anything to help your brand online, it was there for. I started asking the brands about Amazon. And this was like 2012, 2013. And in 2012, 2013, they would like look at you like, "What? Like what? Like, we don't care about Amazon, like the bookstore." And, it wasn't that bad, but it was sort of classified in the same category as eBay. And they're like, "We don't need to pay attention to that." And I just knew like, I sold, for instance, after books, I sold all sorts of stuff. During the holidays, I probably sold a couple thousand units of Easy Bake Oven refill kits. Like just while I had a full-time job, as I could get inventory, like it wasn't even in Amazon's fulfillment centers. Like there was no correlation to like why this was successful. And so I went to these brands like, we don't need to pay attention to Amazon. I was like, you have no idea. I didn't tell them that. I'm like, you have no idea the volume here. So we said, all right, if you don't want to pay attention to Amazon, how about we buy and sell your products for you? And then we're going to do all the stuff that you should be doing on Amazon, like correct your images, update your titles, make your bullets look good, do all the things that are going to convert your products into more sales. We're going to fund it by selling your products instead of charging you fees. And so that was sort of the impetus. And there were a couple clients there, and we asked them if that was an interest to them, and they said yes. And so we sort of then were like, all right, it's a different thing. Let's spin it off and start a net new company.
And so when you started it until you sold it, what were those key critical things that you did in order to build it up to make it as successful as it really was?
It starts with a good partner, and I had two really good partners, right from the beginning. They had sort of been through businesses before, they had sold businesses before. And so when I remember after like a couple months, we had cash flow issues, which I didn't even know what cash flow was at the time. It just meant we didn't have enough money to pay my salary. And so like, I called my buddy and I was like, hey, we're like short on money. And then he's like, oh, it's called cash flow. And I was like, oh, okay, that's what it means. And so their sort of sense of calm when I thought things were sort of chaotic was always reassuring. So having them as good partners around, and then it was me sort of running it. And I'm sort of just sort of obsessive, and I just like to put a lot of effort into things. But then I'm limited too. And so realizing like, what are you going to be really good at versus what is better to just hire. And so we made some strategic hires pretty early that weren't probably the best financial decision for the business at the time, but really then brought in the pieces of the business, all the non-artsy stuff, I like to say, that really I'm just not going to be good at. I'm not going to be passionate about. And so really, we've been able to stand up a pretty significant business on a very small team, because we bring in the people that, are going to be a part of this family that really can shoulder a couple of jobs worth of work.
So it seems like the key elements were really good partners, sound business fundamentals of understanding cash flow and hiring and delegation. And then it seems like there's also this component of self-awareness where you recognized, I am good at XYZ, obviously more than just three things, but XYZ.
Might not be. Which is X, actually.
So then my question is, on that self-awareness piece, what are you the best at? I know you said the non-artistic things you're not as passionate about, but like artistic things is still a pretty broad term. Like, what specifically are you truly like the best at?
I think the first most important piece is just people. So when you have a prospective client that's coming in, or when you're dealing with a vendor that's supplying product to you, it's just being able to connect with them on the level that they want to connect on to, help everybody, get what they want out of the deal. Drilling it down, I knew how to sell stuff on Amazon really well. And this was like 6 years ago when nobody knew how to sell anything. And so that was just road tested time, sort of like in the water, for lack of a better analogy, where I just knew how to do it. And so, over time, there's been more knowledge about how to sell stuff on Amazon. There's courses about it. I taught a course about it. And so, there's what my knowledge has become a commodity over time. And so really then what does it come back to? It's like, well, how do you work with people? And, over the course of having, dozens and dozens of clients, and now a parent company that, multi-billion-dollar parent company, and sort of navigating through that, I think it comes back to like, how do you interact with people and the staff and all that? So I think that would be my superpower, I guess you would say. Although most would just be like, he's really good at Amazon. That's the thing.
When you sold the business, how did that change? Like, how did that change your life?
If we start, there's the financial piece, but we can sort of park that. But like, if you look at it from a headspace perspective, because if you're an entrepreneur, and I think this was where it goes back to having good partners, their vision for what this could become was so much broader than mine. I remember we had an investor, and after our first year, we did like, I don't know, $2 or $3 million. And that's a pretty good run for your first year. And he's like, that's pretty good. But if you did 3, you could do 10 next year. I was like, what'd you say? We just did 3, like maybe we'll get to like 4. He's like, no, you'll do 10. And I was like, he's like, what are you going to need for 10? You're gonna need a bigger warehouse. You're gonna need this, this, and this. He was like ready to go. And I was like, okay, slow down. Let's just pause and then let's figure that out. And so, I remember writing on a notepad and just leaving. I was like, I remember the secret. I'm like, I'm going to look at this. And it ended up coming to fruition. And so, them having that vision for how big it could get was super important. So when it came to the acquisition and being acquired, we started, sort of positioning our business in a way that would be more acquirable. So doing the things that we think that potential suitors to the business would want to buy. And those are things that, when you sell your business, like private equity can come in and buy it. Just personal investors can buy it, or strategic partners can buy it. And it's always best, in my opinion, to find a strategic partner because they're the ones that can further accelerate your business. And normally they're going to give you the most money for it too. And so, we started fine tuning it in a way that if we were going to become acquired, here's the ideal suitor, and then here's what's going to happen. So from a changing of, the day-to-day, my day-to-day didn't change too much. Our parent company said they were not going to come in and change anything. And they've honored that still to this day. We're about 2.5 years in. Really the piece that changes for entrepreneurs is the headspace. Because all of a sudden you've got new people to talk to. You have a boss, which you didn't have before. And you've got systems and protocols in place that, they operate a multi-billion-dollar business with that you now have to implement into your smaller business. And so I think there's that piece of it, which is just a little bit distracting. And then on top of that, you as somebody who's sort of climbed a mountain and, now you're on top of a mountain, for lack of a better word, like you realize that, there's like 16 more mountains out there. And it's not just this like finish line, like rode off into the sunset. Like there's so much more that you're going to potentially want to do. And so those are sort of the big pieces for me that I, I'm still working through to this day. It's, now that you're through, like, what are you, I still love this business and still working here and still very motivated about where we can go. But you do have to every day sort of think about like, all right, day to day, because as entrepreneurs, we're wired like to build things. Right now it's like we're still working on the thing that we built. And so it's really, just staying really motivated and positive in the business.
So it seems like it did change things in like a organizational way. Like, now there are like bigger corporate policies and things that need to be brought in, and like you are working with a bigger parent company. But it also seems like there was that, like, I think the magic of what you said was you saw all those other mountains. And like, to me, that's like, that's an amazing gift, because then you're like, oh wow, now like the vision of what it can be has just increased even more, which like increases the potential of and the challenge that we can rise up to.
Exactly. And what's so cool is, and that's the benefit of like a strategic partner, like we don't have cash flow issues anymore. When we used to close new deals, it was great because we'd get a new client in, but you'd have this like instant deal hangover where you're like, all right, we gotta fund, a couple $100,000 to order their product and sell it. And when you're growing a business, getting loans from banks, especially with like the volumes we were doing, they were like, you guys are nuts. We don't want to talk to you. And so, I think that it's cool because you actually can see those mountains. And, if you go back to that 3 to 10, like that 3 to 10, when they want you to go from a bigger number to doubling to another number, like it doesn't seem that crazy because you've sort of done it before at a smaller scale. And now you've got their like fuel in your engine. And they're like, we want you guys to do all this stuff. And so it is cool. It's a very interesting though, because I think, but a lot of us think that like, you just get to the top, that's it. Like you're done. And it's totally not that. I can't stress how much it's not that.
So then where do you want to take it? How big do you want to go? Like what, I hate to use the word limit, so I'm not, but like peak are you trying to go for now?
Inside the business here, because I've got personal ones, I've got business ones. And so, inside the business here, continue to work with really cool cutting edge brands to help them bring their products to market to their customers. And that's the fun part. Like, we don't work with like cigarette companies and booze companies. We're working with companies that are actually putting products out there that are worth buying. And so, if you're thinking about like how you sort of have an impact on culture, it's like we allow the culture to buy these cool products. And so as we've, grown within this organization, we get introductions to all of their clients and all of their portfolio. And so it's really cool to continue sort of that mission to just, allow brands to get their products to customers. Personally, it's just continuing to grow and to learn and to stay excited about the business. Going through the acquisition, there were so many pieces that I learned that were just total gaps in like my entrepreneurial acumen. And there's bigger pieces within the broader organization where there's potential opportunities to help them out. And so it's cool to it's sort of like when you start your business, you're like building a chessboard, and then you're like sort of the players, and then when you get acquired by a business, like you're acquired by the people now starting to move the pieces. And so it's cool to start thinking about like, well, maybe you could be like the chess player, right, instead of just the pawn sort of in the game.
That's awesome. So we talked about personal development earlier, and I'm curious now that you've been through this journey, this incredible journey that you've been on, what are the most important things that you've learned about yourself along the way?
I think the biggest piece about it is when you sell your business, like I said, there's a lot of things that sort of come with it. And a lot of those things sort of took up a lot of my headspace. And it was sort of pulling me out from being present, at the business in my life, because it was sort of like, like I said, my dad is the example. Like, he was always working, but what he wasn't working on? He wasn't working on an iPhone. He was like, had pen and paper, and he was working on that. And so I think the intrusiveness of technology in our lives is taking us out of our lives far too much. And so, finding sort of the boundaries of what you should be working on when, but really trying to, all right, if you are going to work to it, like commit and actually be mindful of the things that you're doing. And when we have phones all over the place and text and vibrating, like if I got a text message right now, I'm going to be talking to you, but half my mind's going to be thinking about how I'm going to respond to that text message. And then somebody's be waving, like there's just so much intrusion. And so what I found out, I joked for like the first year and a half after acquisition, I said, I always knew that they would like take the business, but I never knew they'd get like a third of my brain, because I felt like just part of my brain was gone and everything just felt fuzzy and distracted. And it really didn't come back. And it was good. Like, I don't look back on that part with any like sort of regret. It pushed me towards looking into meditation, something that I'd known quite a bit about over the years, but I was like, all right, I'm just going to start sitting down and trying to like and it wasn't to like focus. It was to have a break between all this technology and all this noise and just see what would happen. So that's really what sort of led me towards doing more meditation and stuff like that.
That's amazing. And now that you've been meditating, how is that? Like, what's that been like? What have your experiences been with that?
So when I started meditation, it was like, all right, I'm just going to like sit and like read a book. And like, I read a book about meditation. Like, I'm off to the races. Like, cool. Like, maybe like I'll have some crazy spiritual experience. I'm still waiting for that. But what I didn't like realize is meditation teaches your brain how to concentrate, like so much better than anything that I've ever been experienced to. And so someone with ADD, like if I can sit down and focus on something, even if it's like a minute at a time, and then your mind wanders off and then you bring it back to just counting your breaths. Like, I always thought it was this thing where you were supposed to stop thinking, but it's totally not that. It's like, pushing your mind towards where you want it to go so that it can be sort of concentrated, or to open it up if you don't want it to be concentrated. It's just being in control of your brain. And, I'm like a mile a minute person, as I'm sure you're guessing, that I've already left out all my annoying stories. But, that's just the way my brain works. And so to actually have an ability to pause it, like it's pretty profound. And the most profound thing that's happened as a result of it is, way back when in third grade, we didn't go that deep, but like I was hospitalized for a week. And so they had all sorts of needles and stuff in me, and I had to come home with like a catheter. And so I've had a tremendous fear of needles ever since. Like I didn't go to a doctor. I just went to a doctor for the first time like 4 days ago. It was like, since I was 18. I'm 35 now. 34, 35. And so we're in there and I'm like feeling like I'm like laying down. They're gonna draw my blood, and I'm feeling like the